the attendant violence to the innocents associated with it. Something like 4,000 or 5,000 of the 10,000 people killed in Mexico, just people who were standing there when they got ripped down by the AK-47. Remember, in the 1920s, these were the reasons we used to get rid of prohibition. Disrespect for the law. I don't like growing up with disrespect for the law, but I have on this topic. Of course, the drug tends to get adulterated, though not cannabis, because of its natural, organic nature. But it does tend to become more potent, in for the dime, in for the dollar. So cannabis potency certainly has gone up in my lifetime. And government says that they're concerned about that. Well, if they're concerned about that, we know that we can reduce the potency by taxation. So, those are the 7 golden rules of prohibition. It took a constitutional amendment to ban alcohol. It took a constitutional amendment to bring it back. But we don't have that for marijuana. All we have is Harry J. Anslinger. We have some bizarre subcommittee testimony about field Negroes developing sexual appetites for Caucasians. Again, science, and that of course being non-science, leads this discussion. And just, I mean, again, you live in a blessed world where you can type in Harry J. Anslinger. When I was your age, in your early 20s, you'd have to go to the library, go look it up, climb a ladder.
Which you did. You're just bitter because you spent your whole life.
I'm just so old. So blessedly, you can find out the lies that brought a 1 minute and 6-second debate. That is how long Congress debated on the floor of Congress. And how did it even come about? The American Medical Association was the chief agency against bringing on the prohibition because they were protecting the associations that were part of their membership, which were the pharmaceutical companies that were selling medical marijuana tinctures mainly. And so they had testified strongly against it. And there was kind of an agreement that at least medical marijuana in the form of a tincture would be okay and exempted. But somehow they got lost in the discussion, and in that 1 minute and 6-second debate in Congress, somebody said, well, what is the AMA? Because as you can do, as we so defer to physicians in this country, probably wrongly so, but we do, particularly the AMA. And back then the AMA was in our corner, and they said, but it was misrepresented on the floor. Someone said the AMA does not support this, and I mean, does support making it illegal. And that was completely misrepresented in the record. That's not what they had testified in almost 3 different subcommittees before that. So the very history of prohibition itself, the fulcrum for which it turns on, is just bizarre. It's not scientific. It's not moral. It's arguably not constitutional. But yet here we are 70 years into it. And pick right up from there.
Yeah, I can definitely, I think Alan gives a pretty good opening to the direction that I would take this. And first I'd say, you know, Alan mentions that now you can go online and type in a name like Harry Anslinger or type in marijuana and get so many things. A lot of the reason for that is because of the work that Alan did climbing those ladders and doing all that stuff so that we don't have to now. And not just Alan, but the folks at NORML over the last 35 years now? 40 years? 38. Man, was twice as old as I am. But yeah, they've done an amazing job of keeping this issue in the limelight, and you know, certainly Kevin with his movie has reached a whole lot of a new generation of people to kind of start thinking about this critically. So I certainly, you know, thank them for the work that they've done. To kind of go off on take it to the next step from where Alan started, I'm really glad he talked about alcohol prohibition because it's incredibly relevant to look at these. You know, he mentioned the notion of juxtaposition, and I run an organization, SAFER, which is essentially based entirely around that juxtaposition, in that we are constantly highlighting the fact that marijuana is far less harmful than alcohol, not only to the people who use it, but to society in general. Because unfortunately, this is a fact that many people in this country do not understand. In fact, only about 33% of people in this country understand that. I would venture to guess that somewhere near 100% of this room probably understands that. But it's important to understand that most people don't. And we'll get into this more when in the talk in a couple hours about reform efforts and what they're up to these days. But I strongly feel that one of the biggest things standing in the way of changing these laws is the perception of harm surrounding it. And that perception of harm surrounding marijuana is grounded in years and years and years of propaganda and prohibitionist laws and policies. And as Alan mentioned a few of these arguments, the whole notion of racism, black men raping white women, lazy Mexicans, avoiding work and robbing people and being crazed by smoking pot. And more recently, we've heard the arguments about the gateway theory and about increased potency, mental illness, addiction. The list goes on and on and on. And I know Kevin's going to address some of those myths, so I won't get too far into them. But what we see is that over the last 70 or so years, we have been increasing the perception of harm surrounding marijuana. Whether it's making people fear that their friends are going to go crazy, or their friends are going to shoot them, or their friends are going to, or they're going to lose their girlfriend to an alien, or any of the number of things. That's the latest line. But or that you're a loser. I mean, overall, there's just this notion that there is a harm associated with this drug, and because of this harm, we cannot possibly change these laws. But in the end, when we look at these two drugs, I mean, essentially, marijuana is a substance, much like any other substance, like alcohol, like chocolate. Andrew Weil, famous physician, wrote a book from chocolate to morphine. And these substances are all treated differently in our society. And for some reason, our society has opted to treat this particular substance, marijuana, in an incredibly perverse and ridiculous fashion, especially when compared to similar drugs. And I think alcohol is the nearest in comparison. Obviously, these are both recreational substances. People generally use them because they enjoy them. It's a social lubricant. They have fun. They like the way it makes them feel. It gives them some insight into life. It inspires their creativity, what have you. I mean, obviously, yes, marijuana has medical properties, religious, implications, but essentially, 90+% of marijuana users, or people who have used marijuana, are using it for fun. Like Barack Obama said, I inhaled, that was the point. Couldn't agree more. So what's interesting is that, when we look at alcohol, now, as Alan mentioned, they used to have prescriptions for alcohol, and certainly there's some health benefits to alcohol. You hear about drinking red wine and its, protection of the heart and so on. But overall, why do we use alcohol? We use it for generally the same reason we use marijuana. To have a good time. Social lubricant, inspires people. I mean, look at, most of the most prominent writers in our society. They were all pretty much drunk when they did their best work.